right, thumbs up. Let's do this. Good morning, everyone. It's morning here on the East Coast, which means it's definitely morning on the West Coast of the US. For our friends in Europe, thank you for tuning in late. And if anyone's in like the Asia Pacific region, you're a crazy person. I love it. Yeah, so my name is Brad. I'm at Brad Orego on pretty much everything. So just find me there, find me on Slack. Pronouns are the or he for those that are curious. We're going to talk about research democratization here today, and specifically what we've done in the past 3 years here at Auth0. I'll get into this a bit, but I sort of came to Auth0 with a hypothesis that I had formed over the previous few years interacting with the research ops community. I think we successfully proved that hypothesis, and I've got some numbers to indicate why I think that, and then we'll talk about how we did that and what we're doing now. Like, we're not going to be an ops first research practice forever. Why is that happening, and sort of what we're moving towards. So in terms of the agenda, just a little bit of sort of what things looked like before I got there. As I mentioned, we'll talk about how to build a research ops first practice, when you should, when you shouldn't, why you should, etc. Some of the lessons learned, some of the things that we could have done better, and a sneak peek at what's next. Some of the things you'll learn today. So if I do my job, one, you'll understand when you should and when you shouldn't build an ops first research practice. You'll understand what the key elements are of building one out, and you'll sort of get an idea of what evolution looks like, after you've succeeded. And why should you care, right? Like, why are you here? Why am I giving this talk? Why is this important? So we've got a bunch of numbers, as I mentioned, some things that I think have proven out the value and the sort of success of this approach. So if you look at the number of studies completed in 2019 by Auth0, there were 3. And in 2022, we completed 27. So that is a 9x increase in the amount of research that we've done. We have about 550 insights in our insights repo. That's about 8.7 per study completed. I don't know what a good benchmark is for that, but I thought it was a cool number. We've increased the number of people who do research, or PWDR. I'm not on the powder train yet, but we've increased that number by a factor of 7. We had about 6 folks at Auth0 previously, and now we're sort of up to like 42 or 43. We've serviced over 100 insights requests, and these are sometimes solved by existing data. These are sometimes passed to our data science team or somewhere else in the organization. But we have we just got a few today that were like 104, 105 in Jira. So literally hundreds of requests served. And we have 1,800 participants in our research panel that is run through Great Question. It's been a huge addition to our toolkit. We were doing it through like Google Forms before, and that was pretty messy. So a lot of people actively engaged in the research that we do. A brief plug here. A lot of the content from this talk is derived from a few blog posts that I've written and some other stuff that the team has worked on. You can go check out the Medium. It's in there. It's got a lot more detail. We just published one on Monday, sort of talking about this evolution piece, but yeah, go check that out if you're curious. So intros aside, let's talk about what life looked like before I got here. So Auth0, we are now an Okta company. We sort of provide an identity and access management solutions. What does that actually mean? Basically, if you're a developer and you want to build a website or an app that you want somebody to sign into, you can write that code yourself, or you can just pull Auth0 off the shelf and we'll do it for you. So you as a consumer, if you've ever signed into Peloton or The Economist or IKEA, all the Atlassian products, Headspace, Motley Fool, recently OpenAI started to use Auth0. Like, those are all products that in some way are using our software. So you've probably signed into something powered by Auth0 before. In terms of the timeline, in 2013, Matthias and Eugenio recognized this need for a simple, developer-friendly IAM solution. They started Auth0, jumped forward a bunch of years. They grew and grew and grew, raised a bunch of money. In 2019, they raised their Series E, and they're like, hey, we need to get IPO ready. We're in this hyper-growth stage. We really need to invest in product and in UX. Few months, that date's wrong, 2020 Q1. Look at that, my slides are wrong. Beginning of 2020 is when I joined Auth0 as their first research hire, first head of research. And then about a year and a half later, Okta acquires Auth0, and we're still working through that merger. So a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of what the future looks like is, a side effect of that. So what did research actually look like? This is a screenshot. I actually managed to pull this up on Confluence of one of are personas that the team was working on before I got there. So there was some research, right? It's not to say that there was no research, no one knew anything, we didn't talk to customers, right? Things definitely happened, but it was, kind of ad hoc. It was pretty loosely structured, and it was really just in time, right? Someone's working on something, they want, some insights, they want some feedback, they want to test a design, they go out and, reinvent the wheel every single time they do research. Auth0 had a researcher. Sheely was the first researcher. At Auth0, I believe she transitioned from a marketing role, but this happened before my time. So shout out to Sheely for introducing research to Auth0. But at that point, there were about 10 teams and one researcher, and those numbers just really don't work out. So when our chief product officer and our director of design joined, they recognized we sort of need to invest more in research. Some of their challenges were typical, right? There's a lack of standardization of process or methodology. We had siloed and a disjointed understanding of customers. I still to this day will use the example that if you say the word developers within Auth0, like different people think different things. We recently did a whole bunch of research and put some archetypes together to help break down that monolith. But we're using the same words. We're not actually referring to the same thing. Recruiting challenges, we all know in research and in operations, recruiting is the worst. Everyone hates recruiting. So, research was already seen as something that took a lot of time, and then you sort of increase that cycle time by some of these challenges. There are also some atypical challenges. So by this, I mean things like being at a hyper-growth startup, getting sort of things ready for potentially going public. IPO readiness is like a whole separate set of demands. And we are a privacy and security company. We're in a highly regulated industry. So there are things that we, have to do that other companies don't. There are things that we can't do that other companies can. We recently had to switch survey tools because the, compliance just wasn't happy with our current vendors. So these things happened to us, and these were some of the challenges that we were already facing. So what does it look like to build an ops first research practice? Well, first of all, what do you mean by ops first? This, as I mentioned, this is a hypothesis. So, we all know the drill. We all know what happens. Companies don't plan for research. Usually what happens is that someone decides to hire a researcher does some good work, and they say, great, go hire more. And then they reach what I call the oh shit moment. So usually when you get to around 8 researchers, you recognize that there's a need for operations, because you're like, everyone's doing things differently. And this isn't like, we're not reaping the benefits of having a team. And you have to undo all the years of, all the habits, all the tools, all the processes, everything that sort of evolved naturally. You have to go and undo that work. So I'm calling 2018 the year of research ops. We have the tweet from Kate, who's speaking later today. I think having had conversations with Kate, she's like, I think we'd get, 50 people. And, suddenly there were hundreds, and now we're up to, I think, 14,000-ish in the research ops community last time I checked. But yeah, Kate starts the community in 2018. That's also the year that I got in touch with Tomer. Tomer Schroen was at WeWork, previously at Google, had since been at Goldman Sachs, and is now working on his own startup. But Tomer and I had a lot of really good conversations. He really helped me sort of formulate this hypothesis of like, we should invest in research operations, and you should do it first. I'm calling 2019 the year where I sort of formed this hypothesis and failed to launch, because part of launching an ops first practice is making sure the environment's right, making sure you're cultivating or seeking out the right environment. And where I was in 2019 was definitely not it. So I tried to do something like this. It stepped into a director of UX role at 1010 Data, was the first person in that role, and tried to put some of these things in place, but just like, for a variety of reasons, it wasn't the right environment. So I kind of learned the hard way that if you want to invest in operations, you need to set that up properly. But the question was always, what if we built the tracks before the train came through? Like, what does it take to get to that point where we can invest in operations, then we can scale everything up after that? What are those circumstances? So the way that you approach this, from my perspective, is to use the 8 pillars of user research. This is one of the earliest sort of big projects that we put out in research ops. Emma Bolton and the other folks in research operations were instrumental to making this happen. If you're not familiar, go check out the writing on it already. But you can use the 8 pillars to guide your strategy here. So what you should do, go on a listening tour, right? Go on, talk to your peers, talk to senior leadership, talk to anyone that will sit down with a meeting, sit down for a meeting with you, and just ask them questions about the research that's happened, how they make decisions, what data they wish they had, right? You can use these 8 pillars to frame what you hear. So every little piece of feedback you get, align it to one of these 8 things. Then I wouldn't recommend picking more than 4. I would honestly start with 2. We chose 4 for a variety of reasons, but pick at most 4 of these pillars and focus on, making some changes based on that. So for us, we went out, we did this listening tour, and we picked 4 things to focus on: scope, recruiting and admin, knowledge management, and tools and infrastructure. So of the 8 pillars, we cut it down to half and say, these are the things that are the most impactful. These are the things that we really need to do some work on and make some progress on. So what did we do? Well, to answer the scope question, we put together a consistent engagement model, started working on a research playbook, really started to standardize the way that we do research. In terms of recruitment and admin, we actually put together 3 different recruitment pipelines, one for our enterprise customers, one for our pay-as-you-go self-service and free users, and then another one for folks who have never heard of Auth0. Because if we want to do research and acquisition, talk to software developers who haven't used Auth0, and of course we have enterprise customers and people in between. For knowledge management, build an insights repo. This isn't rocket science. There's nothing new here. But I think we spent a lot of time iterating on what that repo looks like, how it's structured. Carolyn published a blog post about the evolution of our insights repo. So that's something we've spent some time on, how we share knowledge, where it's shared. We've toyed with the idea of having a Slack bot that would give you a nugget of the week, right? There's a lot of different things that we've tried in terms of knowledge management. And then tools and infrastructure. So when I joined Auth0, I think we had 7 different survey tools. We got that down to 2 or 3. We added a few things like Tremendous and Respondent and eventually Great Question. So we had to add some new things. We had to take some things away, but really got ourselves to a point where we have a toolkit that serves everything that we need. A big question I get when people talk about democratization, about ops first, is quality, right? Well, what do you mean people are going to do their own research? Aren't they going to mess it up? Democratization is not a free-for-all. Just because you're letting people do their own research doesn't mean they're just doing it, of their own accord and of their own volition. So, we put standards in place, we put specific quality checks in place, and we spent a lot of time doing what I call education and evangelization. You'll probably hear me say that a half a dozen times during this talk. I think this is crucial if you want to democratize, if you want to build ops first, you really need to invest in these 3 things. So when we say quality checks, what does that actually mean? This is quite literally the way our process works. You submit an insights request, we sit down with you, write your research plan, help you select your audience. Our ops team will get you all of your recruits. Then it's on you to go do the research, and you'll take a first pass at the analysis. Once you have done all that, you come back to us and we say, all right, let's take a look through the analysis that you've done, and then we will nuggetize your findings and put them in the repo. So there's a few key quality checks along the way. We're writing the research plan for you, which means people aren't doing their own research. They're doing the research that we prescribe. We're also making sure the analysis is correct, so we're not introducing any bias in our findings, and we are enforcing a proper structure for things that go into our repo. So if you are someone 6 months from now trying to pull some insights out of that repository, it makes sense. It's a consistent structure, and you're not losing the context that you would get in a research summary or presentation, anything like that. In terms of templates and education, we've put together consistent templates for research planning, doing your research analysis. It's a Miro board that we usually use, and sharing your summary. We had the idea of putting together a slide deck, but we sort of let that up to each individual team, trying to balance how prescriptive are we being versus how flexible are we being? Because at the end of the day, it is, democratized research. We're not completely controlling everything. We also do these things that I call research deep dives and research readouts. So the deep dives are, usually a 45 to 60-minute workshop or a lecture demonstration, and we pick one topic and we just go deep on it. This Friday, Rodrigo, our ops lead, is going to lead a deep dive on recruiting and like sending a good recruiting email and how to select your participants, right? Like this is something we still do. Research readouts are, again, once a month. It's essentially little 5-minute summaries of what research did we do, what did we learn, and this is anything that's wrapped up in the past month. So every single month, there's a consistent, time slot on everyone's calendar that says, here's all the research that we've done. So we've talked a lot about what does it mean to build an ops first practice? Why did we do it? Where were we coming from at Auth0? Let's talk about some of the things that we certainly could have done better. I'm not perfect. We've been learning as we go. What does this look like? So I mentioned this a few times. You need to cultivate the right environment. What do I mean by that? Essentially, I've identified maybe a few key factors, 3 or 4 of them, of when you should invest in research ops. And then if you don't have those things, what you should do about it. So times when you should. You have a high level of buy-in from leadership as well as your peers. This is a mistake that I made. I made the assumption that because we were aligned at the top level, that all of my leadership, all of senior leadership was like, yeah, let's invest in research. That doesn't mean every single team understands what that means and is on board. This is something we definitely could have done better. Secondly, that there's a high level of maturity for UX and for research. Use the Nielsen-Norman Group maturity model. It's really great. It's sort of, it helps you assess where your team is at. And if you have a large enough team or budget to support taking immediate action. So that's something that, yeah, I would recommend, if you've got a big enough team, go do it. If you don't, we'll talk about what to do otherwise. So if you shouldn't, what to do if you shouldn't, what to do when you shouldn't. Focus on delivering research first, right? So you want to, show the immediate value, provide a model, provide something for folks to aspire to. A lot of times, early on at Auth0, people are just like, I don't know what this is supposed to look like. Can you help me out? As I mentioned, educate and evangelize, build the understanding, build the sort of demand for research and why it matters. And then foster cross-functional relationships. You want to help accomplish shared goals by working with your partners in marketing, customer success, legal, whatever it may be. If you don't have the people to do it yourself, find folks that can help you. This kind of just sums up what I just talked about. 2 dimensions, maturity versus team size, and whether you're taking action immediately, you're educating, you're focusing on relationship building, whatever it may be. In terms of the next lesson learned, avoid premature optimization. So you really want to focus on the most impactful needs first. By this, it's, you're listening to is really important. What you think is important may not necessarily be the most important thing. So as ops people, we love optimization, we love efficiency, but you need to make sure that you're building trust and credibility by helping people solve their problems. If you're off working on something that we don't see immediate value to, you're going to start to lose some of that cred. As I mentioned, your wants aren't always the most impactful. I think data governance is super important. Is it really urgent? Probably not. Don't get distracted. And then remember, ops is a flywheel, so it's going to take some time to see the outcomes. You're going to need to burn some social capital to buy the faith that you need to see the long-term impact. The last sort of lesson learned here, co-create whenever possible. So even if the end results are the same, you want to make sure that people are engaged in the process. There's this proverb, I believe from Burkina Faso, that's what the internet told me, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So you can move really quickly, but if you're not bringing people with you, you're probably not going to have long-term success. This also avoids what I call the ivory tower syndrome. You don't want people to get the sense that you're being bequeathed this from on high. You want to make sure people are involved. So how do you do that? You find key opportunities to integrate, things like, where does research fit into the existing process? Listen to the people that are boots on the ground, trying to do this research. So a brief look at what's next. I'm also keeping an eye on time here, so trying to speed things up a little bit. Apologies for that. But we're evolving our ops first research practice. And I want to make the point that ops first does not mean ops only. You're going to want to scale this eventually, like you're doing an ops first approach to get your team ready for scale. There's a bunch of long-term benefits that you're going to reap by doing research operations. First, onboarding people to this team is super easy. I've done it 4 or 5 times now, and everyone's just like, it's all set up for me. This is great. And evolution doesn't mean you're giving up. So you can continue to support self-service research. We're doing this. Our ops team still has that self-service democratized path. And if anything, it's a sign of success. The increased demand for research means you need to evolve beyond this current model. How do you know which model to choose? There's centralized agency, there's embedded. It kind of depends on the needs of your organization. Every team's going to be different. It also depends on what I call the product team to researcher ratio. So some people talk about PM to designer, designer to engineer. For me, it's just like, how many product teams are you trying to support, and how many researchers do you have, and what are their capabilities? So our path forward here is we're going with a centralized agency model. And we're doing this because, we'll have 4 researchers, there'll be 20 product teams. There's no way we could embed anyone that would make any amount of sense. It also gives us flexibility, right? So we can move people around, have them focus on different things while providing that sort of depth and focus. We have a research triage process. So when things come in, no longer is it all self-serve. Something comes in, we say, all right, is this a self-serve thing or not? It's a small enough project. If it's simple enough, we'll probably put that down the self-serve path. Otherwise, it goes on a backlog and we give you an estimated delivery. If you don't like your timeline, we can sort of descope that and get you back on track. The prioritization depends on a variety of factors, whether that be urgency, business priorities, whatever it may be. And then in terms of operations, we're going to continue to support our people who do research. And we're going to actually focus our effort not just on supporting, but on evolving that research practice. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you. Alec is coming in to give me the vaudeville hook, but
never. Wow, that was awesome. There's so many. It's such an interesting and novel kind of approach to building a research team. We've seen a lot of different companies struggle with this and scale up the researchers without thinking about the ops. And this is a really interesting take. I hope we can get you to hop in and answer any questions in DMs or in the Slack channel if you have the time. But it was great to hear all this directly from the horse's mouth, because I know that you're one of the people who really pioneered this ops first approach. So thanks for joining us today, Brad.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll be in Slack. I'll be around the rest of the conference. So
cool.
Yeah, drop your questions in. Happy to chat.
Amazing. Cool. Thanks so much, Brad. And head on over to your next talk. Hope you learn lots.